Chapter 7 The Lion and the Unicorn. Soldiers were running through the woods, first in twos and threes, then in tens and twenties. At last there were so many they seemed to fill the whole forest. Alice hid behind a tree. In all her life she had never seen soldiers so unsteady on their feet. They were always tripping, and whenever one went down, a few more fell on top of him. Soon the ground was covered in heaps of men. Then came the horses. They were better than the men, but even they stumbled sometimes. And it seemed to be a rule that whenever a horse stumbled, the rider fell off. The confusion was too much. Alice crept away from the woods. Soon she found the White King sitting on the grass writing in his notebook. The king looked delighted to see her.
"Did you happen to meet any soldiers, my dear, when you came through the woods?" he asked.
"Yes, I did," Alice said. "Several thousand."
4,207, the king said, looking at his notebook. "That's the exact number. I couldn't send all the horses, you know. 2 of them are wanted in the game, and I haven't seen the other 2 messengers either. They're both going to town. Just look at the road and tell me if you see them."
"I see nobody on the road," Alice said.
"I wish I had such eyes," the king said, "to be able to see nobody. And at that distance, too?"
This was lost on Alice. She was still looking at the road. "I see somebody I know," she cried.
"That's Heicha," the king said. "The other messenger's called Hata. I have 2, you know. 1 to come, 1 to go."
Heicha arrived, quite out of breath.
"Whom did you pass on the road?" the king asked him.
"Nobody,"
said Heicha. "Quite right," the king said. "This young lady saw him too. Now tell us what happened in town."
"I'll whisper it,"
Heicha said. He put his hands to his mouth in the shape of a trumpet. Then he leaned very close to the king's ear. Alice was sorry about this. She wanted to hear too. However, instead of whispering, Heicha shouted at the top of his lungs,
"They're at it again!"
Who are at it again?"
"The lion and the unicorn, of course!"
Fighting for the crown?" Alice said.
"Yes," the king said, "for my crown. Let's run and see them."
As they ran, Alice sang the song. "The lion and the unicorn were fighting for the crown. The lion beat the unicorn all around the town. Some gave him white bread, some gave him brown. Some them plum cake and drummed out of town." "Does the one who wins get the crown?" Alice asked.
"No!" the king cried. "What an idea!"
When they reached town, they found a huge crowd. The lion and the unicorn were fighting in the middle. They were in such a cloud of dust that Alice could not tell one from the other. Then she was able to pick out the unicorn by his horn. They stood next to Hata, the king's other messenger. Hata was watching a fight with a cup of tea in one hand and a piece of bread and butter in the other.
"How are they doing?" the king asked.
Hata began to speak, but his mouth was full of bread and butter. He tried desperately to swallow. Finally he said in a choking voice,
"They're doing very well. Each has been down about 87 times.
The fight paused. The lion and the unicorn stood there panting.
10 minutes for snacks,
the king called to the crowd. Heicha and Hata set off with trays of white and brown bread. Alice took a piece, but it was very dry.
"I don't think they'll fight any more today." "Order the drums to begin," the king told Hata.
Suddenly Alice saw a streak of white in the distance.
"Look!" she cried. "There's the White Queen running from the field. She came out of the woods. How can those queens run?"
"There's some enemy after her, no doubt," the king said. He didn't even look. "The woods are full of them."
"Aren't you going to run and help her?"
Alice asked.
"No use," the king said. "She runs so fearfully quick, you might be able to catch a bandersnatch."
At that moment, the unicorn walked past. His eyes fell on Alice. He stopped at once, a look of horror on his face. "What is that?" he said.
"It's a child,"
Agatha cried. "We found it! It's large as life and twice as natural."
I always thought they were fabulous monsters, the horse said in awe. It's alive.
"It can talk,"
Hiya said solemnly. The unicorn gazed at Alice. Talk, child. Alice couldn't help but smile.
"You know, I always thought unicorns were fabulous monsters. I'd never seen one before."
Well, now you've seen.
"Of course," Alice said.
I believe in you if you believe in me, the unicorn said. Do we have a deal?
"Yes,"
Alice said. Fetch the plum cake, old man, the unicorn yelled at the king. Not brown for me. Certainly, certainly, the king muttered. He motioned for Hiya to serve the cake. Hiya took a large cake out of a tiny bag. He gave it to Alice to hold. Then he got a big dish and a long carving knife. She had no idea how the tiny bag could hold it all. It was like a magic trick. The lion joined them for cake as well. He was gazing at Alice, blinking in exhaustion. He seemed very tired. What is this? He asked. You'll never guess, the unicorn said. Are you an animal, a vegetable, or a mineral? The lion asked Alice. A fabulous monster, the unicorn cried before Alice could answer. Then hand out the plum cake, monster, the lion said. He lay down on the ground, yawning. And sit down, both of you, he called up to the king and the unicorn. The king seemed very nervous to sit between the two giant creatures, but there was no other place for him. What a fight we could have had for the crown now, the unicorn said. He looked slyly at the crown on the king's head. I'd win easy, the lion said. I'm not so sure of that, the unicorn said. I beat you all around town, you chicken, the lion snarled angrily. Here the king interrupted nervously. All around town? He said, his voice shaking a little. Did you go near the old bridge? I don't remember, the lion growled. Then he looked over at Alice. What a time the monster's having trying to cut that cake. Alice sat down on the bank of a little brook. She sat the dish on her knees. She was sawing away at the cake with the big knife. I've cut several slices already, she called, but they always join back together again. You don't know how to handle looking-glass cakes, the unicorn said. Hand it around first, cut it after. This sounded like nonsense. Still, Alice did as he said. The cake divided itself into 3 slices as she carried it around. Then she held the knife over the empty dish, not sure how to begin. It's not fair, the unicorn cried. The monster's given the lion the bigger piece. She keeps none for herself, though, the lion said. He turned to Alice. Monster, don't you like plum cake? Before Alice could answer, the drums began. The noise filled with air. It rang through her head until she thought she might go deaf. She jumped across a little brook in terror. She covered her ears. The noise was more than she could bear. End of chapter 7.